Hey guys, Mr. Mini Painter here and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I painted Haleth, the Prince of Rohan from the War of the Rohirrim box by Middle-earth strategy battle games creator Games Workshop. So there are two versions of this guy and you can choose how to assemble him with a spear, with his axe, with a helmet or without. So there's different options, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how I painted most of those options. So the axe, the spear, with or without the helmet. So a lot of things to choose from. So I hope this video is of any help to you guys, and if it is, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you, and of course consider liking and subscribing this video and my channel. And also check out my Patreon pages. I'll be painting a lot more and different games there. You can follow me for free and check it out and see if it's worth your while. So for now, let's get to painting Haleth. So I primed the model Haleth in a light gray primer, and I'm painting the mounted and standing version simultaneously. So I'm going to show you how I painted the standing version, and once finished you'll see that I've painted the exact same elements on the mounted version, and we'll continue from there. You can assemble these models in different ways. So for the standing version I chose for the spear instead of the axe, and you can choose for different heads as well, I believe. So I'm going to paint both of them, so a helmet version and a face version, and two different weapons to just show you what the possibilities are. Now for the face we're starting with a base color of Bugman's Glow. There's a tiny piece of ear showing here, and the rest of his face is uncovered. Once this is done, we're going to wash it with some Wayland flesh shade. Just slap it on. I'm going to be highlighting from there. I always try and make the eye sockets nice and dark. You can do so by leaving them black. For this one I chose the Wayland flesh shade option. And the next step, with some Cadium flesh tone, we're going to be highlighting the larger panels of the face. So that is the forehead, the nose, but make sure that the deepest part of the nose, where it attached to the forehead, is remains darker. That way you get a sense of depth in your face. The eye sockets remain nice and dark, and try and paint the cheeks around the mouth. So there's some fine lining there as well. So you're covering about 80% of your previous layer. We're going to repeat this step with some Kislev flesh and paint in some eyebrows, highlight those. You can make some frown lines in there if you want. And basically we're repeating the last step, but decreasing the area that we paint. So just the tip of the nose, just the forehead. Now with some palette witch flesh I'm painting in the white of the eyes. And try and keep that area surrounding it nice and dark. And then for the pupil, it's a tiny dot of Abaddon black. Now when layering those colors, the skin tones that is, what always works good is make a solid line where you want the color to be the brightest, and next thin down your paint and kind of wash towards that brightest part, so you get a nice transition from your previous layers. Next step is the hair. We're going to give it a base coat of Steel Legion Drab. We're going to give him a nice blonde head of hair, and this is the perfect base coat for that. Now I had to do two coats because my Steel Legion Drab was a tiny bit runny, a bit watery, so I had to do two layers to make a good coverage. Now we're going to give him some golden hair, and to do so I'm using Zamazi Desert. And with this Zamazi Desert I'm basically following all the strands of hair, top to bottom, and leave some of that darker shining through. And these are those hard lines I mentioned before when we were painting the face. So what you can do now if you want to kind of blend it together is thin down your paint and go over the darker areas as I'm doing here. So apply it as kind of a wash. And that way the differences are smaller in between layers and you get those nice transitions. If you're doing this, and I'm using a Shabti bone for this next layer, you have to build up in several layers instead of maybe one or two, because otherwise the difference is too small. So with this Shabti bone, I'm just touching some of those raised areas, the parts that would reflect the most light, so the top, on the front of his head, the very ends, the tips, and some of the strains on the top of his head. And next, to blend it all together, I'm using some Seraphim Sepia, slightly thinned down, and make sure that there are no puddles forming anywhere. So when you see that, just clean your brush, dry it, and take it back. Then some lead belcher for all the metal parts. There's a lot of chainmail here, but also the tip of the spear, for example. So there's some metal items to be covered. Underneath his arms here. And the rest of his armor is more of a leather armor, which we're going to cover later. So I'm doing the spear here. If you chose the axe, it's basically the same approach. And I'm going to paint the axe with the mounted version later in this video. So for the leather parts, I'm using rhinox hide. Just pure rhinox hide. Slap that on all around it. There's quite a lot of leather armor on this miniature. So it's the chest here. I'm leaving the belt as it is. We're going to paint that with a different color. The arm, shoulder pads. And we're also going to be using this color as a base coat on the boots, or at least the leg protection, not the boots themselves. We're going to finish in different highlights on those items we painted now, but for the base color it's all the same for this part. Also the rim underneath the chainmail I painted with this rhinox hide. Next we're mixing some Skavenblight Dinge and Corvus Black for the trousers he's wearing. It's just a tiny bit of showing, but important to give it that color. Also on the back of the leg protection is part of this pants is showing. And then the shoes themselves we're going to paint with pure Corvus Black. The nice thing about Corvus Black is basically a very dark gray, so that works really well with painting blacks, for example, without them being really, really black. Now we're also covering the gloves he's wearing with Corvus Black as well. His left arm is a bit hard to reach, but this one is quite easy. And once this is done, we're going to give the cloak a base color of a mixture of Deathcore Drab and some black, just to darken it down and work up from there. I love this Deathcore Drab green tone. But I want to use it as a highlight as well, so that way that's the reason I'm choosing black very often as a color to tone down, to darken some of those colors, so you can use the original color as a highlight of its own. So slap that on, make sure that it dries. There are some hard to reach places here on the back, but you'll manage. Just put your brush in between his legs like this and you'll get there eventually. Then with some pure Deathgore drab, you can do the first highlight layer, and you can go fairly wide with this because this is a first layer, so I'm covering a lot of the panels here and just leaving the recessed areas, the folds, a bit darker. So again, with this, we're painting about 70 to 80% of the previous layer. You can do so by holding your brush sideways like this, or if you're very confident, just follow those folds and lines. That's it. And once this is done, I'm using pure Castellan green, as it is a bit more yellowy, for another highlight stage, and each time I'm decreasing the area that I paint. So I'm focusing a lot on the top folds, the bottom, the parts that would bounce off the most light, so it's the parts that are a bit pointing backwards. And I'm repeating that, but then as an extreme highlight by mixing in some Elysian green. And this time I'm only doing some edge highlighting, just those tiny folds on his shoulders here, and the very ends, the tips of the cloak. And to blend those colors together, we're using the same approach as I did with the skin tone. So first put the line where you want it to be the brightest, and next thin down your paint and pull your paint towards the brightest parts. So where you first touch your brush, that will be the most watery, the most runny, and you're kind of pushing the paint towards the brightest so you get a transition from dark to bright. Then for the leather, I'm mixing some Bugman's Glow in dried bark and kind of following all the outlines of this body armor, giving it a nice edge highlight. When doing this, it's important to have your paint in a good thickness. So when you're painting straight from the pot, you will never achieve something like this because, let's face it, Citadel paints are terrible from the pot. So you have to apply it to a palette or water it down, or on some tray you have. Whatever you're using, make sure that your paint is applicable. So I'm using the same on his shoulders, his wrist pads. And next, to add some yellow to the mix, I'm covering it with some Agrex Earthshade. And the nice thing about shades is that it instantly gives, it leaves some kind of shine to whatever you apply it on. It's kind of reflective afterwards. Teeny tiny bit, which is great with this leather armor because you can, it really gets that close to that leather look. Now for the metal parts, I'm slapping some null oil on there. Make sure to get that in the recesses and those nice dark parts in the middle. The pants I'm highlighting with some pure Skaven Blight Dinge, and I'm using that on the boots as well. And not to forget the gloves. Then I'm giving it an extra highlight with some Mechanicus Standard Grey, which is slightly brighter. And this time for the gloves, for example, focusing mainly on the knuckles, the top finger, stuff like that. Then with a mixture of Rhinox hide and Mournfang brown, I'm painting the pattern on the leg protection, just to have them a bit different than the rest of his armor. Now make sure to let that dry and then take some pure Mournfang brown and repeat the process as a highlight, focusing mainly on the top areas and the parts for here, for example, on the bottom that would bounce off the most light. And then it's time for the belt, which I'm painting with pure Doomble Brown. Gives it a nice red leathery look. I'm highlighting that with some pure Bugman's Glow. Now when you've gone too far or touched a little bit too much in the middle, just go back to your previous color, for this example Doomble Brown, and paint the middle line again. So that way you can decrease the thickness of your edge highlight if you're not very satisfied in the end, which is what I do very often. Then the gold details I painted with some Retributor armour. That's just some parts of the buckle here, but also the hilt of the sword. And not to forget the two metal-shaped things that are holding his cloak to his armor. There's some tiny details here on his belt. So the hand, how do you call this? The part where you hold the sword, I'm painting with some Corvus Black, and next I'm washing all the gold parts with some Reichland Flesh Shade. Then with some Mechanica Standard Grey I'm painting the rock he is standing on. And as you can see, I primed my model in a light gray primer, which means that my modeling sand is also light gray, which is perfect for adding some Garagax Sewer, my favorite go-to, all-time go-to wash paint. Actually, it's a contrast paint for base painting, because it really resembles that sandy look. I'm slapping some Nuln Oil on the rock to bring back those tiny details. And let that dry for a while, and in the meanwhile we're painting the spear with some dried bark. We already did the metal part, so it's all about the wooden part now. If you're painting the axe, you can approach that in the same way, I guess. Now that the rock is dried, the Nuln Oil has dried, we're painting some grey sear on this rock to bring out those sharp edges. You can do so by holding your brush sideways, that really brings out those tiny fine lines. And what I do also here is just take a dry brush and kind of brush over that as well. Make sure that basically all of your paint is off the brush. I'm using a dry brush and some Baneblade Brown to do the same on the spear, because I didn't really want to highlight it a lot, but tiny bit. Now we're going to the mounted version. As you can see, I've painted the exact same way as the standing model, and we're going to continue with the parts we haven't painted before from here. I'm using lead belcher on the helmet, just cover all of it. Since I didn't choose for the head with the helmet on the standing version, I'm painting it here. And as you can see, this miniature is holding his axe as well, instead of the spear or any other weapon. Also slapping some lead belcher on there, and that gives her a nice base tone. The skin of the horse I painted with the Mournfang Brown. It's going to be a nice light brown steed, and it's also a lot of fun to paint all those different horse skins. Thinking about maybe making a future video about all different skin options for those as well. Next I'm mixing some Mesbg Desert into the Mournfang Brown as a first highlight stage. I'm basically covering more or less the front, or the part that will reflect the most light. So imagine where your light source is and start painting from there. Then once this is done, I'm taking some pure Mesbg Desert and painting the extreme highlights. So that is the joints, the front, just some tiny lines here and there. Some raised parts on his neck, his ears, the tip of his ears, stuff like that. Tip of the nose, of course. Now if you want, you can use the same process as we did on the skin, so water it down, kind of blend over it as I'm doing here. So you get more variance with the same tone, which is a beautiful result. As an extreme highlight, some rock art flesh, just on some tiny parts, because I don't want to mess up the color. So just very carefully, very gently apply it here and there. Now I'm using Doomble Brown for the cloth part of his armor, the bottom part, and all the leather, I think it's leather, parts of his armor. There's a lot of those lines here in between every layer. Now we're gonna do so again in a next step, but for this is just applying the base color, and we're gonna be highlighting that a little bit further on, and we're gonna apply a wash over it, so I want to redo them afterwards. So don't be, well, of course be precise, but don't spend too much time, as we're gonna clean it up afterwards anyway. I'm also applying the same color Doomble Brown on his helmet, so on the tiny band here in the front. Should just pick those out with the tip of your brush. Now it's time for the yellow, and I'm using Baylor Brown for the yellow panels. There is a lot of it, so take your time. It's these two rows in the bottom, and everything in between the red we just painted. Try and stay clear of the red, otherwise you have to do it several times, and I want to stick to 2 if possible. So be as precise as you can here. It saves you a lot of time. Now this really approaches a yellow look, but still has some brown in it. I'm slapping some Yanden yellow on it, as it has a bit of red in it, and it works beautiful as a shade. But as you can see here, it's dulling down the Doomble Brown we painted before a little bit. So once this dried, I went over it with some Doomble Brown once more. But for the yellow, this is the perfect finish. So now, of course, we have to be very careful with the Doomble Brown not to touch the yellow. Then with some rock art flesh, I'm painting the woolen underlay. There's probably a word for that as well. It's kind of a blanket, right, where the saddle rests on. My lack for English words here is quite obvious. The hair and manes, the tail, I'm painting with some Carrick stone. So also the manes on his head. Or her head, I'm not sure. Then it's time for the thing on his or hers head. I've been using some corn red on those eye panels here. And the rest is going to be metal, according to the box art. I'm just following those lines here, taking it all the way to the side. And then the middle part I'm painting with some lead belcher. And you can see here there are some red lines I followed. The rest is going to be getting this metal look. Also those tiny bolts here that are holding his armor together. I'm using some lead belcher on that as well. Then it's time for some gold details, and for that we're going back to Retributor armor. There is this piece on his chest here. The stirrups. And some details on his head armor as well. Next I'm taking some black Templar to paint the padding on this blanket here, and the fun thing about this contrast paint is that it immediately creates shadow and highlighted parts. So don't overdo it on your paint, don't put too much on it all at once, because it will be all black. So kind of spread it out. You get this very nice result on a hard to reach place. Next I'm taking some null oil and I'm washing the metal parts we painted before, the silvery metal parts. Also adding a tiny bit to the nostrils and the eye to give it some shade. And a tiny bit around these metal details here, just to make them stand out a little bit more. And finally on the helmet, which is all metal, so make that all covered with null oil. Now for the woolen part of the blanket I'm using apothecary white, and the reason I'm doing this is because I think null oil is a bit too strong on whites, or you have to thin it down and it's quite tricky on how much, and this is so much easier. I really love the apothecary white. I'm using some Seraphim sepia to bring out some details on the horse's head. And I'm also applying it to the hair we painted before, so the tail, the manes. Just using it as a pure wash, so I didn't really thin it down. Then there is a tiny line of Zemesi desert here surrounding the black of the saddle blanket. And then with some Mournfang brown I'm painting the saddle itself. Then it's time to highlight those tiny bits of red we did with some Fiston red Focus on those top parts. The highest parts, I mean. I went a bit off camera here, sorry about that. Here we are again. Just painting those tiny red lines here. And now to get a nice transition, we're going to apply this on the helmet as well, as tiny vertical lines here, leaving the Doomble Brown in the middle. Now we're going to repeat that process with some Evil Sun Scarlet, but focusing on a smaller area now, so you get a nice flow in reds. Now with some dried bark, I'm painting all the straps, the reins he's holding. And now it's time to highlight that with a tiny bit of Gorthor Brown. Now this is always a very fine precision job, and if you're not really comfortable in highlighting those tiny straps, then just don't, because it's not worth it if you think you're gonna mess it up. I often mess it up, and what I do then is just go back to my base color and try and paint the middle once again in a sort of straight line to bring back the previous color. So don't worry too much, just try it every now and then. Then with some Abaddon Black I'm painting the hooves. And then there are some horseshoes to be painted with Leadbelcher. Now I'm dry brushing some Shabti bone on the manes and tail of the horse just to give it a bright tip. It's a nice highlight. Make sure that your dry brush is nearly dry. And finally we're going to be adding some sharpness to the battle axe, and for that I'm using Stormhost Silver, and I'm kind of pulling lines, as you can see here, so that it really resembles a sharp blade. I'm also doing some edge highlighting on the rest of the metal parts, and of course the helmet as well.